Hey guys, so I really like these minimalist style wallets and I really wanted to make one of my own. So I figured best design concept I could come up with was a Beskar ingot from Mandalorian. So hold my world currency and fantasy currency. Now I don't have anything to cut metal like this, but I do have lasers and I have sheets of acrylic. So the first thing we should do is take one of these wallets apart and we can see the full layout and how it's made. This one here is just held in with 4 bolts, as you can see on each side. And then we're left with a money clip, which is just a thin piece of sheet metal, and then 2 front panels and 2 back panels. And then we have the inside panels as well. As you can see, there's a little channel in the middle and to the side for where the elastic will sit. And this is what the elastic piece looks like. Pretty simple. So yeah, we'll use this and make a pattern with it. Alright, so this is the pattern so far. To get to this point, I use Fusion 360 just because I find it a lot faster and easier to get all the dimensions and the spacing of all these holes, which is pretty critical to get them matching up on all 4 panels. I undersized all of the holes just a little bit because I plan on drilling and tapping them out to the correct dimension later. The bolts we're using are really small, so I want to make sure each of those threads has as much plastic as possible. I just don't want them to get stripped out. And then this blue area is, as you saw with the metal ones, going to be where the elastic's going to sit. And for each little spot where it goes through, you can see I kind of inset it just a little bit. That way, once it's all put together, and you'll see the front panel has none of them, so it should overlap just enough. So that'll be nice and flat, and that little space will take up just for the elastic and be nice and clean, so it won't be sitting in too much or it won't be poking out. For the, I don't know what you would call this, the spot where you would push to get your cards out, I did 3 panels and left the front one so that the front looks as nice as possible. And then I did this one just so you can kind of reach past the cards and get all of them out in one go without trying to like fidget with it too much. So the next part was making the Damascus pattern itself, the little notches that go on the backside, and then the Imperial logo itself. So I did some searching online for different Damascus patterns, and I found this picture that looked pretty nice. And you really want to find something that's not multiple colors, like a gradient. Like you don't want the colors to mix. You want really harsh edges. Something like this right here wouldn't be so great. But with something like this, you can actually make it black and white. And to do that, go to Path, Trace Bitmap. As you're adjusting the threshold, you can see just how much of the darks are going to be shown versus the lights. And then just hit Apply, and you'll be left with something like this. And then you just overlay this exactly where you want it, just like that. And then you just use these as a template to cut out from the image. So you'll need duplicates of that. And then it'll look like this, and it'll have the nice little patterns. So now let's go ahead and get the laser set up and get this cut out. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the inside panels first, and before we can even start cutting it, we need to measure the elastic first. So then we can use our power slash speed gauge so we know what settings to use so that we're engraving enough of the material out so that it actually sets inside the back panel enough so that when we put the front panel on, it's not squishing it up and bowing the material out. And then for the front 2 panels, I used the same depth gauge to figure out 2 different power settings, one for the 2 strips and the logo. I wanted those a little bit deeper than the Damascus pattern itself. For the Damascus pattern, I just wanted it deep enough so that it actually burned through the protective layer and into the plastic a little bit, just so that when we apply the paint, it's actually sticking to there and not sticking up to where it's going to easily be scratched off. And then for the front panels, I'm using this Tamiya black with the protective cover still on there. I cleaned out the grooves really good just to get any dust and whatnot I could out of there, and that way it sticks really well. Don't really have to primer these. The Tamiya brand stuff really seems to stick to stuff really well without having to use a primer, and that's why I'm choosing that here. Even if it scuffs off a little bit, that's fine. It kind of just adds to the effect. Well, now that we've got these painted and we need to wait for them to dry to put them together, let's start on the elastic band. I test fitted this on there. This is the one from the wallet that I used for the template, and it seems like it's a little bit tight. As you can see, it's like bowing, so I need to make that a little bit longer. But also, it seems okay, but possibly could be a little bit longer as well in the other way. So let's get some measurements and then cut some elastic. And then we want to make sure to double this and then add a little bit for the seam allowance. Now, I really don't know how to sew, and I really just know the basics of how to use a sewing machine, and I struggled with this piece like 3 or 4 times, had to keep cutting new lengths, and I think it would have been so much easier if I just started with hand sewing this instead of using the machine. I really thought the machine was going to be the better option, but I did finally get it in the end. But thinking back, I should have just used needle and thread. I probably would have been done so much quicker. So, we got this together. I ended up sanding this part down because it was acting like Velcro and just kind of sticking. So, when you go to open it, it didn't want to really flex right there. Like it wouldn't slide and actually flex. So, sanded that smooth, and then I didn't really trust my stitching just because I couldn't go back and forth. It was just jamming the machine. So, I used a little bit of super glue, and I trust that much more than my sewing. So, now that's all working as it should. We need to put threads into the holes and finally unmask these, see how that looks. So starting with the back panels, I drilled all these holes out to the correct diameter for the tap that I plan on using. And then for the front ones, I measured the bolts so I can get a drill bit just slightly larger than them because they're just going to be through holes. They aren't going to be having threads in them. And then after drilling out each one of those, I used a chamfer bit with a depth stop on the drill press so that I could chamfer them down to a specific depth so that the bolts sit just perfectly flush with the front panels or just a little bit underneath. That way they don't catch on anything and it's as neat as possible. And then the last thing I had to do was use a tap to tap out each of the holes. This just puts threads in them so that I can actually put the bolts in and it'll hold it all together. Well, now that we've got all the machining done on these, it's time to finally peel off all the masking tape and see what it looks like. Oh wow, that's looking pretty nice already. Jeez. That's like super reflective. Well, here's how it turned out. And I don't know if you can tell, but like where the etching is on the black, there's like a little bit of a pattern to that as well. And it just kind of like goes with the whole like aesthetic of it. It looks so cool. I really like how this turned out. I didn't expect it to turn out this good. So something I just noticed when I was peeling these off is there's a bit of a lip around the edge, and then the edges, especially on the black ones, as you can see, are just really wonky and weird. And then there's spray paint from the black. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and sand these down a little bit and see if I can get a satin finish to it. I could do a gloss finish that matches with that, but I feel like that would look kind of odd with how this looks, and more of a satin finish would look better. So I'm gonna do that. So for sanding the panel edges, I bolted the front and back panels together. That way, once we're all done with the sanding, it'll eliminate any of the discrepancies between the two panels and should look like one nice uniform piece. I used 3 different pads, rough, medium, and then for the final one, I used these micro mesh pads with some water. And I just used the second to the lowest grid just because I want to go for a satin finish and I'm not trying to go for a full glossy shine. And then this is how it turned out. It's nice and satin finish, and there's really no edge you could tell between the two panels. And the last thing we need to make is a money clip. So I drew up two different designs. One that's very simple, doesn't have an eyelet, and then this one has an eyelet so that I can hang it off of a lanyard, or if I wanted to hang some kind of keychain off of it, I can do that as well. Now, the only thing I have is this 1 millimeter thick sheet of metal. I believe this is like half a millimeter. I didn't measure it, but this is the thinnest stuff I have right now, so hopefully this will work. I'm going to etch design on this with the laser, cut it out with the angle grinder. Hopefully it works. So I started with drilling the holes first, since it'll be much easier to do as a large sheet of metal than small tiny pieces. Then I used the angle grinder to just roughly cut out each individual piece, and then I moved over to do the bulk of the work on the bench grinder. And this took quite a while. I don't have all the clips apparently, but I got it as close as I could with this, and then once I got it as close as I could be without going too far, I moved over to using the bench vise and some hand files just so I could get the final shape as neat as possible and get rid of any burrs or anything like that. After that, I had to figure out how to shape these into actual usable money clips because they're not very useful as just flat pieces of metal. I was thinking at first go from one end and like bend each bend from one end to another, but if I did that, the bench vise wouldn't be able to hold it, and I wouldn't have any actual way of bending it from one to another. Then the idea came to try from the middle, and surprisingly that worked, and I just did each bend from the middle out, and I used hammer with a screwdriver and sometimes a crescent wrench, and that seemed to work really well. I also marked and measured each bend when it was critical so that I can know exactly how much space to leave to bend it. I also left just a little bit of room from the vise to the actual bend mark because since it's 1 millimeter thick, it's going to have extra space to bend. So I just kind of took that into account and just eyeballed it. Surprisingly, it worked out fine on the first try. Now, obviously, the one without the eyelet at the top was much easier to bend in place since I didn't have to worry about the two bends at the top, but I still did it in the same process that I did the one with the eyelet, starting with the top bend next to the eyelets and then worked my way down just to keep it matching if for some reason it didn't match up, doing it the opposite direction. And after that, I tried using some paper just to see if it would actually hold on there and not deform too much to where it'd be bent and actually return back, basically testing the springiness. And it seemed to work just fine. It's a little bit bulkier than the other one, and it doesn't flex as much, but it functions, so that's all that matters to me. So I wanted these to be black, so I got some of this perma blue. It's for bluing like guns and such. I haven't used it before, but it's pretty easy. Just gotta wash it and then like with some alcohol, apply some of this, let it sit for a minute, then rinse it off, and then reapply until I get a good finish. The only thing is, apparently I'm supposed to have some kind of rust protection at the very end to sit overnight. I don't have that, so we're gonna use it without it, see what happens. Just give it a shot. I did get a couple of marks on the pieces from bending it. You can really see it like right there. So I'm gonna use some steel wool and this little Scotch-Brite pad and see if I can get a more even finish on it before I do that, because I feel like whatever that is gonna be locked in and affect how that looks. So let's start with that. And then I'm just going in the same motion here. I think if I swirled it in like a swirly motion, it just wouldn't look so great, and this will probably put like a more brushed look on it. It's a little bit better. There's some pitting going on right here, especially in this crack. I can't really do anything about that without having something more abrasive, but I don't have anything like that without having to go through sandpaper. So we're just gonna have to make do with this. A little bit of weathering is not bad anyway. So after sanding them and getting them all cleaned up as best I could, I used some alcohol to try to degrease them, as I know that would mess up the finish. I thought I did a good job, but maybe not. As you could see when I was applying it, it was kind of splotchy and kind of weird. So I kept reapplying it, thinking maybe more layers would work. That didn't really seem to be the case. I ended up using steel wool and applied it with that because I heard that would work. It basically was removing the black oxide looking layer and kind of just going for like a more gunmetal look after that. So I just kind of went with it and reapplied it over and over with the steel wool and using lots of the blue dye. And it turned out like this with like a gunmetal look. I think it looks nice. Not quite what I was going for black, but it'll work. And now with that being done, everything's finished. We just gotta put it all together. So let's do that and see the final showcase. So I really love how this turned out, and the edge is nice and smooth. The money clip itself is a little bit lighter in color than I wanted. I want it to be black, but gunmetal is still pretty good. I think it looks a lot better than the bright silver that it was. And it's a little bit tough to pull up, but it does hold money very well. And it's like stuck in place, so I'm not gonna have to worry about that. And then I don't have any cards I want on camera, but I have these little thank you cards that I send out with every order that I sell for horns. And those fit in there pretty nicely. Actual credit cards are a little bit wider widthwise, so they're easier to get out than these are, but this is still doable. But yeah, turned out really nice. And then this is with the other money clip. I was able to get that actually lined up pretty much perfectly, which is exactly what I was going for. Because ideally once it's hanging from a lanyard, it would balance perfectly and not be shifting forward like that or something. So, really happy with how that turned out.